They drove her out of her husband's house in the middle of winter, penniless, simply because she hadn't given birth to a son. And when a blizzard hit the town of Red Hollow, she thought she would die there, alone, name unknown. But then a stranger appeared, not to save her. He came to propose something even crazier, marriage. No love, no promises, just a survival agreement. Like if you want to know if she accepted, and comment the name of the city you're viewing from so I know how far this story has progressed. The stagecoach driver did not wait for her to gather herself before he threw her bag down into the snow. It landed with a dull thud, and the leather strap split on impact, and Clara Ashford stood there watching her few remaining possessions fan out across the white ground like evidence of everything she had already lost. A hairbrush, a folded handkerchief, a tin photograph of a man she had loved for 6 years and would never see again. "End of the line, ma'am," the driver said, not unkindly, though he did not climb down to help her. "Red Hollow, such as it is, such as it was." Clara picked up her things without a word. She had learned, in the past 3 weeks, that there was no use saying anything at all. Red Hollow in January looked less like a town and more like an argument between a few buildings and the wind. A general store, a livery, a saloon with a broken shutter that banged against the outer wall in a slow, miserable rhythm. A narrow hotel that looked as though it had given up on itself sometime around 1869 and had not made any improvement since. The street, if it could be called that, was a channel of packed ice and frozen mud, and the few people moving along it did so with their heads bent and their coats pulled tight, as though the cold were something personal. Clara stood at the edge of it and felt the full weight of where she was. She had 43 cents. She had a split bag and a tin photograph and a hairbrush. She had a dress that was not warm enough for this weather, and boots that had been resoled once already, and no letter of introduction to anyone, and no plan beyond getting off that stagecoach before the Ashford family found some other way to humiliate her. She was 28 years old, and she had nothing. It had not always been this way. She had married Thomas Ashford in the spring of 1874 when she was 22 and still believed that love was the kind of thing that protected you from other things. Thomas had been the second son of the Ashford family of Beaumont County, not the heir, not the one with the land and the weight of expectation on his shoulders, but a man she had found genuinely kind and patient and funny in a quiet way that didn't announce itself. They had built a small life together, not a grand one, but hers. The trouble had started almost immediately, though Clara had not understood the shape of it until much later. The Ashford family wanted grandchildren. Specifically, they wanted grandsons, heirs in the old-fashioned sense, boys who would carry the name forward into whatever future the Ashfords had decided they deserved. Clara had wanted children too, had wanted them badly enough that each month that passed without news had felt like a small private failure she carried alone. Thomas had told her it didn't matter. Thomas had meant it, she thought, or had tried to. But Thomas was dead now. A horse, a broken fence, a November afternoon that started like any other. And the moment Thomas was in the ground, his mother had looked at Clara across the parlor with an expression so composed it was almost surgical, and said, "You understand, of course, that you have no claim here." Clara had not fought it. She had not had the strength, or the right lawyer, or a single person in Beaumont County willing to stand beside her. She had taken what they allowed her, the 43 cents, essentially, dressed up in more polite language, and she had gotten on a stagecoach heading west because west was the only direction that felt like it had no memory attached to it yet. Red Hollow was not where she had intended to stop. She had intended to go further, to somewhere that might have a school in need of a teacher, or a household in need of a housekeeper, or any kind of honest work that might let her build something small and quiet in her own. But the fare had run out here, and the stagecoach had moved on, and here she was. She stood in the street and looked at the hotel and did the arithmetic. 43 cents would not pay for a room tonight. The man behind the hotel desk was named Purvis, and he had the expression of someone who had spent 20 years watching people arrive in Red Hollow with high hopes and leave with fewer. He looked at Clara the way she had become accustomed to being looked at lately, with a kind of tired sympathy that stopped well short of actual help. $1.50 a night, he said. I have 43 cents, she said. She had stopped being embarrassed about saying it plainly. Embarrassment cost energy she didn't have. Purvis looked at her bag, looked at the snow beginning to press against the window glass. "There's a storm coming," he said, which she already knew. "Bad one. They're saying 2 days, maybe 3. I understand. I can't let you stay without payment. It's not—" He paused. "I'm sorry. It's not a matter of—" "I understand," she said again, and she turned around before he could finish explaining himself, because she could not bear to hear one more person tell her why they couldn't help her while looking at her with that particular expression. She went back outside. The temperature had dropped in the 15 minutes she had been indoors. She could feel it in a specific way now, not just as cold, but as something with intentions. The wind had picked up, and fine snow was beginning to move through the street in thin horizontal curtains, and the light was changing in the way that meant the real storm was not far behind what was already here. Clara stood in front of the hotel and thought, with a clarity that surprised her, that she might actually die tonight. Not dramatically. Not the way people died in stories, with speeches and significance, just she might sit down somewhere out of the wind and fall asleep and not wake up. And that would be the end of it. Of her. Of everything she had meant to do or be or become. The thought was so simple and so terrible that she stood very still with it for a moment. Then she thought, not yet. She did not know what she was going to do. But she started walking because moving was better than standing, and the saloon at the end of the street had light in its windows, and that was enough of a reason for now. The saloon was called the Ironwood, and it was warm in the rough, smoky way of such places, full of men who smelled like horses and wet wool and whiskey and honest labor. No one paid Clara much attention when she came in, which she was grateful for. She found a spot near the far wall, not at the bar, but not entirely in shadow either, and she stood there trying to think. A woman came out from behind the bar, older, broad-shouldered, with iron-gray hair pinned back in a way that suggested she had no patience for anything that wasted her time. "You looking for work, or just for somewhere to stand?" the woman said. "Work," Clara said. The word came out before she had decided to say it. "If there is any." The woman looked her over with the same frank appraisal she probably used on horses and fence posts. "Can you cook?" "Yes." "Can you carry things without complaining?" "Yes." I had a girl who said yes to both those things, and then couldn't do either. The woman folded her arms. "I'm Harriet Flood. I own this place. I have a kitchen that needs someone tonight because my cook is sick, and there are 20 men out there who are going to be stuck here for the duration of this storm, and will want hot food." "I can do that," Clara said. "It's 2 nights of work, 2 meals a night. I can give you a room in the back and 30 cents. 30 cents would bring her to 73. Still not enough for the hotel, but maybe enough for the next stage out, or a few days of food, or some form of margin between herself and the arithmetic that was currently working against her. "When do you need me to start?" Clara said. "Now," Harriet said, already turning. "Keep up." She worked that night until her hands were red and her back ached in a way she would feel for a week. It was hard, unglamorous, repetitive work. Stirring great pots of stew, cutting biscuits, washing the same tin plates over and over. And she did it without complaint because complaining was a luxury she had already decided she couldn't afford. Around 9 o'clock, she heard the saloon get louder. Not louder in the usual way. Not the escalating noise of men drinking and arguing about nothing important. This was different, sharper. She dried her hands and went to the doorway between the kitchen and the main room. There were 2 children sitting at the bar. That was the first strange thing. They were young, a girl of maybe 12 or 13, angular and dark-eyed with her arms crossed and her jaw set like she was bracing for a fight, and a boy who couldn't have been older than 8, sitting very close to his sister with his coat still buttoned to the throat and his face carefully blank in the way children's faces went blank when they were trying very hard not to cry. And standing behind them, talking in low, clipped tones with Harriet Flood, was a man Clara had not seen before. He was tall, not in a way that seemed designed to impress anyone, just a fact of his construction, like a fence post that happened to be cut long. Dark hair, weather-cut and overdue for a trim. A jaw that had several days of beard on it that he had apparently not gotten around to addressing. He wore a coat that had been good once and had since been repaired in 3 places that Clara could count. He held his hat in his hands, turning it slowly by the brim, which was the only indication she got that he was not entirely at ease. His eyes, when they moved across the room in a general kind of survey, were the sort of gray-green that changed depending on what they were near, dark now, in the saloon light, serious and watchful. He was not looking at her specifically. He was simply looking in the way of a man who had learned to track everything in a room out of habit. She went back to the kitchen. An hour later, Harriet came in and leaned against the doorframe with an expression that Clara was beginning to recognize as the woman's version of something complicated. "That man out there," Harriet said, "that's Wes Calder. He owns a ranch about 14 miles north of here. Good man. Stubborn as a wall and twice as difficult, but good." "All right," Clara said. She didn't know why she was being told this. "His wife died 2 years ago. Those are his children." Clara kept washing. "I'm sorry for them. He came into town today to collect supplies before the storm hit. He's stuck here now, same as everyone." Harriet paused. "He's been asking around about something. I told him I'd mention it to you." Clara stopped washing. She turned around. "He's looking for—" Harriet seemed to be choosing her words with unusual care. "It's an unusual situation. I don't want to characterize it in any direction. I told him you were here, and I told him a little of your circumstances. Not to be inappropriate, just because it seemed relevant." "What is he looking for?" Clara said. "He says he needs a wife." The kitchen was quiet except for the wind outside, which had gotten significantly worse in the past hour. Clara could hear it in the stovepipe, a low moan that came and went. "That's quite a thing to be looking for in a saloon in a snowstorm," she said. "That's what I told him," Harriet said. "He said he's been thinking about it for 6 months and hasn't found a better answer. His daughter won't let any woman get close enough to the family to court proper. His ranch is in trouble. He's got a land dispute with Silas Granger. You know who that is?" "I don't know anyone here." "Granger owns most of the county and wants the rest. He's been pressuring Wes to sell the Calder Ranch for 2 years, specifically the water rights. There's a creek that runs through Wes's land that Granger needs for his cattle operation. Wes won't sell. Granger's been using other means." "What other means?" "Legal ones, mostly. He's got a territorial judge who owes him favors. He's been filing challenges against Wes's land title, and recently—" Harriet's expression shifted slightly. "Recently, Granger's been pushing Wes to marry his daughter, Delia. He's made it clear that if Wes refuses, he'll escalate the legal challenges. Wes refuses. Because he doesn't want to marry Granger's daughter. Because Granger's daughter would come with Granger attached, and Wes would rather lose the ranch than hand it to that man through the back door." Harriet looked at Clara steadily. "He thinks a marriage, a legal one, to someone who isn't Delia Granger, would take that particular weapon off the table. And he needs help with his children, and someone who can run a household through a hard winter." Clara looked at the wall for a moment. "He wants to marry a stranger," she said. "He wants to make a practical arrangement," Harriet said. "He was clear about that, no pretense. He said, and I'm quoting him, 'I'm not asking anyone to pretend to feel something they don't. I'm asking if there's someone willing to work hard and be treated fairly in exchange for the same.'" The wind moaned in the stovepipe again. "He said that?" Clara said. "He did. He didn't dress it up at all?" "Wes Calder does not dress things up," Harriet said, with a slight curl at the corner of her mouth that might have been affection or might have been something more complicated. "It's his most useful quality and his most maddening one." Clara looked down at her hands, still damp from the dishwater. 43 cents before tonight, 73 after. A split bag, a tin photograph. A widow's claim that one family had already told her was worthless. "I'd like to speak with him," she said. They sat at a table in the corner of the saloon, away from the bar, while the storm worked itself into a genuine fury outside, and the men around them grew gradually louder and less interested in anything beyond their own conversations. The children had been set up near the fire, the girls still rigid and watchful, the boy now asleep with his head on his folded coat. Wes Calder sat across from Clara Ashford and looked at her in the same way he seemed to look at everything, directly, without apparent judgment, but without softening anything either. "Harriet says you're a widow," he said. "Yes, 6 weeks ago." "I'm sorry." "Thank you." He turned his hat in his hands. "Once, twice." "She tell you what I'm looking for?" "She did." "Then you know it's not—" "I want to be straightforward with you. This isn't something romantic. I'm not in a position for that, and I don't think I'd be honest if I let you think otherwise. What I need is someone who can help run a household through the rest of this winter and into spring, help with my children, and it would need to be legal, an actual marriage. Because of Granger, Clara said. He looked at her steadily. Because of Granger, and because I don't want to do anything halfway and then have it challenged. If it's done, it needs to be done proper. What would I get out of it? He didn't flinch at the directness. A home, steady food, fair treatment. The ranch isn't grand, but it's real. We run about 200 head of cattle on 3,000 acres. We have a main house with 4 bedrooms, a working kitchen. I'd expect hard work, and I'd give it back. And if I wanted to leave? Later? Something in his face moved slightly. I'd rather we talked about that before anything was decided. I'm not looking to trap anyone. I'm not looking to be trapped, she said. I'm asking what the arrangement looks like if circumstances change. Then we'd figure it out like adults, he said. I don't have a lawyer's answer for you. I'm telling you what kind of man I am. Clara looked at him for a long moment. She was trying to read something in his face. Not deceit, exactly. She wasn't sure she was reading for that. Something else. Something about whether this was a man who meant what he said. He looked tired. Not the tired of tonight specifically, but the accumulated tired of 2 years of managing grief and children and a ranch and a land dispute all at once. The kind of tired that got into a person's posture and their eyes and didn't lift between sleeps. He wasn't asking her for pity about it. He wasn't performing it. It was simply there, the way weather was there. Your daughter, Clara said. She doesn't know you're asking this. No. She's going to hate it. A pause. Probably. She looks like she'd be very good at hating things if she decided to. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement. She's her mother's daughter in that respect. Meredith could hold a position longer than anyone I've ever known. It was the first personal thing he'd said, and it landed between them with more weight than he'd probably intended. Your son, Clara said, looking toward the sleeping boy by the fire. Eli. He's 8. Wes stopped. Tried again. He misses his mother very much. He's a good boy. I know you can't promise how this goes, Clara said. I'm not asking you to. Good. Because I can't. She looked at the table, at her hands, at the storm pressing against the window glass on the far side of the room, the darkness and the white movement of snow, and the sound of a world that did not particularly care what decision she made tonight. She thought about Beaumont County, about a parlor, and an expression like a surgical instrument, about 43 cents and a split bag, and the specific arithmetic of a woman alone in a place without allies. She thought about what not yet felt like, and what it cost to keep meaning it. All right, she said. Wes Calder looked at her. All right? I'll marry you. She met his eyes directly. I'm not pretending I know how this will go either. But I'll work hard and I'll be fair, and I think you'll do the same. That's enough to start with. He was quiet for a moment. He nodded. Once, slowly, like a man putting a signature on something he intended to stand behind. What's your name? He said. Your first name. Clara. Wes, he said unnecessarily, since she already knew. But it seemed like the right thing to say. They shook hands across the table, the way two people might seal any other kind of agreement, and outside the storm hammered the walls of the Ironwood saloon, and the boy by the fire slept on, unknowing. And the girl watched them from across the room with her dark eyes and her arms still crossed and her jaw set, understanding before anyone told her that something had just changed. The justice of the peace in Red Hollow was a man named Aldous Ferris, and he lived above the general store, and he came downstairs in his nightclothes and performed the marriage in his kitchen at 10:30 in the evening with Harriet Flood as witness, and the wind so loud outside that he had to raise his voice. He asked the required questions. They gave the required answers. When it was done, Ferris signed the paper and stamped it, and folded it twice, and handed it to Wes, who put it inside his coat. Congratulations, Ferris said, in a tone that conveyed he had seen stranger things, but was choosing not to enumerate them. Storm should break in 2 days. You folks staying at the hotel? Harriet's given us rooms, Wes said. Good, good. Ferris looked at Clara with a kind of benign curiosity. You're new to Red Hollow? I arrived today, she said. Well, he seemed to not quite know what to do with that. Welcome, I suppose. They walked back to the Ironwood through the storm, Wes carrying Eli, who had woken just long enough to register that something was different, and then fallen back asleep against his father's shoulder, and Abigail walking slightly ahead of both of them, not speaking, not acknowledging Clara's presence, holding herself with the rigid dignity of someone who had decided that if she couldn't stop what was happening, she could at least refuse to participate in it. Clara walked beside Wes, a foot of cold air between them, the paper already signed, the thing already done. She was Mrs. Calder now. She held on to that thought and turned it over slowly, trying to find its shape. She had arrived in Red Hollow 7 hours ago with 43 cents in a split bag, a woman the Ashford family had decided was worth nothing, who had no claim to anything she had built or anything she had loved. And now she had a name that was legally hers, and somewhere that was legally home, and 2 children she didn't know, and a husband she had spoken to for less than an hour, and nothing about any of it was safe or certain or anything resembling what she had imagined her life would be. But she was not going to die in the snow. Not yet, she thought, and this time the words felt different, not like defiance against something closing in, but like the first line of something she was only beginning to write. The storm closed around them as they went inside, and Red Hollow disappeared behind a wall of white, and the night settled in. The storm broke on the 3rd day. Clara knew it before she looked out the window. She could feel it in the quality of the silence, the way the Ironwood's walls had stopped shuddering and the stovepipe had gone quiet. She lay in the narrow bed in the room Harriet had given her and stared at the ceiling and listened to that silence for a long time before she got up. She had not slept well. Not from cold. Harriet kept the building warm, but from the specific sleeplessness of a mind that had made a large decision and was not yet done turning it over. She was married. She said it to herself plainly, the way she had learned to say 43 cents, without softening it or dressing it up. She was married to a man she had spoken with for less than 2 hours, and in 2 days or so, when the road north was passable, she would ride 14 miles through the aftermath of a blizzard to a ranch she had never seen, to live with 2 children who didn't know her and one who already resented her, to work against a winter that had already demonstrated it had no interest in being reasonable. She got up and started her day because there was nothing else to do. Wes was already downstairs when she came into the main room, sitting at a table with a cup of coffee and a piece of paper he was writing on. He looked up when she came in, and there was a brief moment, a half second, where both of them were aware simultaneously of what was different from yesterday, and neither of them knew quite how to acknowledge it. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she said. She poured herself coffee from the pot on the bar and sat down across from him, and that was how they had their first breakfast as husband and wife. In a saloon at 7 in the morning, with yesterday's sawdust still on the floor and Harriet moving around in the kitchen making enough noise to fill the silence. "Storm's done," he said. "I noticed. Road north will need another day to settle. We'll leave day after tomorrow, probably mid-morning." He looked at his paper. "I'm writing out what we need to collect at the general store. Supplies I came in for before the weather turned." "Can I see the list?" He pushed it across the table without comment. Clara read it. It was a practical list. Flour, salt, coffee, lamp oil, cartridges for a Winchester, coarse thread, a particular size of bolt she didn't recognize the use of. She read it twice. "You don't have dried beans on here," she said. "Don't like dried beans." "It's not about liking them. They keep and they're filling, and if you have a bad week on the ranch in February, you'll want something in the larder that doesn't require you to have killed anything recently." He looked at her. Not annoyed, more like someone recalibrating something. "Add them," he said. She pulled the paper toward her and wrote it in. Her handwriting was neater than his. Neither of them remarked on this. Abigail came downstairs an hour later with Eli trailing behind her, still in the act of tucking in his shirt. She stopped on the bottom step when she saw Clara sitting at the table with her father, and the expression that crossed her face was not quite what Clara had expected. It wasn't rage or even overt hostility. It was something more controlled than that, a deliberate blankness, the kind of person built specifically to not give anything away. She was 12 years old and already very good at it. "Morning, Abby," Wes said. "Morning." She came down the rest of the steps and went directly to the bar where the coffee was, giving Clara a wide berth that looked casual and wasn't. Eli, on the other hand, stopped a few feet from Clara and simply looked at her. He had his father's gray-green eyes and his mother's dark hair, apparently, and a face that was still round enough to be a child's face while already trying to become something older. "You're the lady from last night," he said. "I am," Clara said. "Papa married you." "He did." Eli considered this. "Are you going to come live at the ranch?" "Yes." Another pause. He seemed to be doing some private calculation. "Do you know how to make biscuits?" "I do." "Ah, Abby burns them," he said in a confiding tone. "I do not burn them," Abigail said sharply from across the room, without turning around. "I make them correctly. You just don't like the texture. They're like rocks. Then don't eat them." "I have to eat something." "Eli," Wes said, not loud, and the boy stopped. A practiced silence fell, the kind that had been established over time, with some difficulty. Eli pulled out the chair beside Clara and sat down in it, apparently having concluded whatever calculation he'd been running. Abigail remained at the bar with her back to the room, drinking her coffee in a way that communicated clearly that she was not part of this conversation and did not intend to become part of it. Clara looked at the list in her hands and did not push anything. The day before they left, Clara found Abigail alone in the stable behind the ironwood, brushing down one of the horses with a thoroughness that was clearly not about the horse. Clara had come to check on her own saddle, which Wes had told her she could use. An older one he had in the wagon belonged to his wife, he had said, and then stopped, and Clara had thanked him and not asked anything further. She had not expected Abigail to be in here. The girl heard her come in and did not stop brushing, but her shoulders changed slightly. "I'm not going to get in your way," Clara said, moving to the far side to check the saddle. "You're already in my way," Abigail said. Not shouted. Said, evenly, like a fact. Clara looked at the saddle. "That's fair." Abigail stopped brushing. Apparently she had expected something different, an argument, or a correction, or the particular adult response of someone who wanted her to feel bad about what she'd said. She turned around, and for a moment her face was less controlled than it had been. "You don't even know us," she said. "No," Clara said, "I don't." "Then why are you doing this?" Clara looked at her steadily. She had thought about what she would say if this conversation happened, and she had decided that the only thing worth saying was the true thing, even if it wasn't the comfortable thing. "Because I had nothing left," she said. "And your father offered something real." Abigail's jaw tightened. "He should have asked us." "You're right. He should have." Clara meant it. "That's between you and him. I can't change how it happened. I can only tell you what I intend to do." "Which is what?" "Work hard. Be fair. Not pretend to be your mother, because I'm not her, and I don't intend to try." Clara paused. "You're old enough that I think you deserve a straight answer instead of a speech, so that's what I'm giving you." Abigail looked at her for a long moment with those dark, measuring eyes. She didn't say anything. She turned back to the horse and kept brushing. Clara checked the saddle and left. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't even the beginning of one, not really. But it was honest, and in Clara's experience, honest was the only foundation anything real could be built on, even if the building itself took a very long time. The road north was rough and cold and took longer than Wes had estimated, because one of the wagon wheels hit a rut hidden under fresh snow about 4 miles out and cracked the rim, and they spent an hour and a half in the wind fixing it while Eli sat in the wagon bed under a blanket and Abigail handed Wes tools without being asked, and Clara held the horses steady, and nobody talked much because it was too cold for talking. When they finally came over the last rise and the Calder Ranch came into view below, Clara looked at it and felt something she couldn't quite name. Not disappointment exactly, but a recalibration of scale. She had not been expecting grandeur, and she had not been given any. What she saw was a main house of rough-hewn timber, substantial enough, 2 stories, with a long porch that had 1 railing post missing, a barn, large and practical, several outbuildings, fencing that went out further than she could see, disappearing into the snowfield, 3 horses visible in the corral, smoke from the chimney, which meant someone had come ahead to keep the fire going, a ranch hand, she learned later, named Cordero, who had been with Wes for 6 years and said almost nothing to Clara, beyond a nod when they were introduced. It was a working ranch. It was real. And for the first time since Beaumont County, Clara stood somewhere that was, technically, hers. She picked up her bag, still split, the strap knotted now where it had broken, and went inside. The kitchen was the first thing she assessed. This was practical rather than sentimental. The kitchen was where the day started and ended, where the work lived, where you could tell in about 10 minutes what kind of household you were dealing with. What she found was a room that had been functional and was now borderline. The stove was good, a solid cast iron range that just needed cleaning. The larder was thin. The supplies Wes had collected in Red Hollow helped, but the underlying stores had been running low before the blizzard. The organization of the shelves told the story of the past 2 years. Things put back in the wrong places, things run out and not replaced. The particular disorder of a household managed by someone doing too many jobs at once. She did not say anything about any of this. She put on an apron she found hanging behind the door and started a pot of beans to soak, the ones she had added to the list, and began taking inventory. Wes appeared in the kitchen doorway around 4 in the afternoon, smelling of horses and cold air. "Settling in?" he said. "Getting the measure of things," she said without stopping. "Your larder's low." "I know, bad fall." "You're almost out of salt pork." "I know that too." He leaned against the doorframe. "I wasn't asking for a report." "I know you weren't." She turned around and looked at him directly. "I'm giving you one anyway, because if we're going to get through the rest of winter, I need to know what we're working with. That's all." He considered her. "All right. Do you have credit at the store in Red Hollow?" "Some." "How much is some?" Another slight recalibration. "Enough for a moderate order, not extravagant." "I'll write a list. You or Cordero can go in when the road's better. Nothing extravagant." She turned back to the shelves. "The stove needs cleaning. I'll do that tomorrow. Tonight I'll work with what's here." "You don't have to start tonight. You just got here." "Supper doesn't know that," she said. He made a sound that, not quite a laugh, more like something that might have been one under different circumstances, and went back outside. She made salt pork and cornbread that first night, which was simple and filling and used what she had. Eli ate 2 portions and said it was very good. Abigail ate without comment, which Clara chose to read as a neutral sign rather than a negative one. Wes ate steadily and thanked her, and after supper he and Cordero talked over something about the fence line on the north pasture. And Clara washed the dishes, and Eli sat on the kitchen floor nearby and told her, unprompted, about a colt that had been born on the ranch the previous spring and was now almost a year old and was his particular favorite. "He's gray," Eli said. "Mostly, with one white foot. Papa says one white foot means the horse is stubborn, but I think he's just selective." "What's his name?" "I named him Compass, because he always knows where the barn is." Clara smiled despite herself. "That's a good name." Abby said it was stupid. "Abby says a lot of things." "Yeah." He pulled at a loose thread on his sock. "She misses Mama a lot. More than she says." Clara kept washing. "I imagine so." "I miss her too," he said, "but I don't remember her as much. Is that bad?" The question was so direct and so earnest that it landed somewhere uncomfortable in Clara's chest. "No," she said. "That's just how it works when you're young. It doesn't mean you loved her less." Eli thought about this. "Okay," he said, apparently satisfied, and went back to the loose thread. The weeks that followed were hard in ways Clara had expected and hard in ways she hadn't. The cold was the constant, a deep structural cold that got into the walls of the house at night and had to be fought back every morning. She learned the stove's particular character, the way it ran hot on the left side, the way the damper needed adjusting on windy days, the specific combination of wood sizes that made it hold heat through the night. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, when Wes and Cordero went out, what the animals needed, what the day looked like in each weather condition. She learned which boards in the floor squeaked and where the draft came in under the east door, and that the pump in the kitchen needed 3 firm strokes before it gave water on cold mornings. None of this was glamorous. All of it was real. Her hands suffered. She had worked hard before. She was not a delicate woman, and had never been. But this was a different quality of labor, outdoor in a way that nothing in her life in Beaumont County had prepared her for. She split wood when Cordero wasn't there to do it. She carried water. She repaired things, or tried to, or figured out who to ask when she couldn't. By the end of the third week, her palms had calluses in new places, and she had learned, through some painful experience, the specific difference between functional gloves and gloves that merely looked warm. She did not complain. Not because she was performing stoicism, but because there was genuinely no one to complain to who would benefit from hearing it. Wes was not an easy man to read. He was not unkind. She had been watching for unkindness carefully, the way a woman in her situation had reason to watch. But he was contained in a way that made it hard to know what he was thinking from 1 hour to the next. He thanked her for meals. He gave her information she needed about the ranch without being asked. He did not talk much for the sake of talking, and for the first week or so, she thought this was indifference, until she started to notice that he listened very carefully to everything she actually said, and that his few words, when they came, were usually precise in a way that suggested he had thought about them before he spoke. She was not sure what she thought of him exactly. That was the honest answer. One evening in the second week, he came into the kitchen after supper while she was going over a rough accounting she'd been keeping. Supplies, what had come in, what had gone out, what was needed. She had not intended it as anything official. She just needed to understand the numbers. He sat down across from her and looked at the paper. "You do accounts?" he said. "My father had a hardware store. I kept his books from the time I was 14. She turned the paper toward him. "I hope you don't mind. I'm not trying to overstep. I just needed to see where things stand." He looked at the paper for a long time. His expression was not easy to read, but something moved in it. "I've been going on memory," he said, "since Meredith died." A pause. "She kept the books. He stopped, tried again. "I'm better with the land than with the numbers." "I know," she said. "I can see it in these figures. The land side is solid. The household accounts have gaps." He looked up at her, not defensively. "Can you fix them?" "I already started," she said. He looked at the paper again for a moment, and then he nodded slowly in the way she was starting to recognize. The signature that meant he had decided something and intended to stand behind it. "Thank you," he said. Not performed, just said. "Ma'asem." Abigail remained the difficult thing. Clara had expected resistance, had prepared for it, but the specific form Abigail's resistance took was harder to navigate than outright hostility would have been. The girl was not cruel. She was not disruptive. She did her chores, she ate her meals, she spoke when spoken to. What she did was maintain a careful, polished distance that communicated very clearly that she was present in this household by circumstance and not by choice, and that nothing that happened here was going to touch her if she could help it. She was 12 years old and already building walls like a woman who had been hurt before. Clara did not push. She had said what she had to say in the stable at Red Hollow, and she had meant it, and she kept meaning it. She did not try to perform warmth at Abigail, did not try to insert herself into spaces the girl had closed off. She kept the standard for everyone consistent. Work got done, meals were on time, the house ran as well as she could make it run, and everyone in it was treated with the same level of practical respect. But she paid attention. She noticed that Abigail read seriously, not the way children sometimes read to pass time, but with concentration. She noticed that the girl had a particular aptitude with the horses, better than Cordero in some respects, with a patience and a sensitivity that the animals responded to clearly. She noticed that Abigail, when she thought no one was watching, would sometimes stand at the kitchen window in the early morning and look out at the pasture with an expression that was not the controlled blankness, but something much younger and less defended. Clara didn't do anything with these observations. She just filed them away. The way you filed away useful information about terrain when you were navigating country you didn't entirely know yet. The opening, when it came, arrived in the form of a horse with a cut on its left foreleg. Cordero had been thrown in the north pasture. Not badly, he was all right. But the horse had caught its leg on something under the snow, a wire stake, and the cut was long, though not deep. Wes was out with Cordero checking the fence, and the nearest animal doctor was 30 miles away. Clara came out to the barn to assess, because there was no one else to assess. She looked at the cut and looked at what she had, and thought about what she'd seen her father do once with a similar injury on a wagon horse when she was small. Abigail appeared beside her. She had clearly run from the house. Papa doesn't know? She said. He will when he gets back. Right now I need to clean this and get something on it before it gets worse. Clara looked at her. Do you know where your father keeps his medicine box? Yes. Abigail hesitated for only a moment, then went for it. She came back in less than 2 minutes, which told Clara she'd been practically running the whole way. She held out the box and Clara opened it and took out what she needed, and they worked side by side, Clara cleaning the wound, Abigail holding the horse steady with a competence that was quiet and sure and completely unself-conscious. They didn't talk much. There wasn't need to. When it was done, Abigail stepped back and looked at the horse, and then at Clara. Where'd you learn that? She said. My father had horses, Clara said, and we couldn't always afford to wait for the doctor. Abigail looked at the bandaged leg. Is he going to be all right? Probably. If it doesn't get infected, we'll need to check it twice a day. I can do the morning checks, Abigail said. Not offered, said, as though it were a practical division of labor and nothing more. All right, Claire said. I'll do evenings. They put the tools away in silence and walked back toward the house. And Abigail did not give her the wide berth she usually maintained. They walked at the same distance 2 people ordinarily walked, and when they reached the porch, Abigail went in first and held the door. It was a small thing. It was a very small thing. But Clara noted it and tucked it away with the other things she was learning, and did not make the mistake of thinking it was more than what it was. It was Cordero who told her about Silas Granger. She had known the name, had known the basic shape of the problem, but Wes did not discuss it with her. Not yet. And she had not pushed. One afternoon in late February, while Wes was in Red Hollow on business, Cordero came in from the barn for a cup of coffee and found Clara at the kitchen table and sat down without being asked, which was unusual enough that she paid attention. You know about Granger? He said. Some, she said. Cordero wrapped both hands around his cup and looked at it. He was a man of about 50, weathered in the specific way of men who had spent most of their lives outdoors, with thick gray-black hair and a face that had long since stopped moving much when he was thinking. He came by the ranch 3 weeks before the storm, Cordero said, while Mr. Calder was out on the south pasture. Came with 2 of his men. Walked around the property like he was already taking inventory. What did he want? To send a message, mostly. Told me to pass along that the creek situation wasn't going to resolve itself in Mr. Calder's favor, and that the longer he waited to negotiate, the less he'd end up with. Cordero took a slow drink. He also said, he paused, choosing. He said Mr. Calder should think carefully about his family's future. Said a man with children couldn't afford to be as stubborn as a man alone. Clara was quiet for a moment. He was talking about the children specifically. That's how I took it. Does Wes know he came? I told him. He didn't say much. Cordero looked up at her. That's how he handles things he's worried about. Goes quiet. She thought about this. And the marriage? Granger knows? Word travels fast in this county. He knows. Cordero set his cup down. He's not going to let it sit, Mrs. Calder. He was counting on Mr. Calder being alone and eventually worn down. You changed the arithmetic. Good, she said. Cordero looked at her with a faint expression that might, on a different face, have been the beginning of a smile. Yes, ma'am, he said. Wes told her himself that evening, which meant he had decided she had the right to know, rather than hearing it from someone else. They sat at the kitchen table after supper, the children already upstairs, and he laid out the situation with the same unadorned plainness he used for everything else. Granger wanted the water rights to Calder Creek. The creek ran through the northeast portion of the ranch, fed into the lower pasture, and was the only reliable water source for 6 miles in either direction. Granger's cattle operation had expanded aggressively in the past 3 years, and the creek represented the difference between a workable summer grazing strategy and an expensive one. He had offered to buy the rights twice. Wes had refused both times. Why? Clara asked. Because if Granger controls the water, he controls anyone who needs it, which is most of the small ranches around here, including this one, even if he paid for the rights, because a payment today doesn't guarantee what he does with that water in 5 years. So he started the legal challenges. The title dispute is the main one. He's arguing that my grandfather's original land grant has an irregularity, a survey error from 1861. It probably does. Most of them do. But it was never an issue until Granger's lawyer started looking for one. What does your lawyer say? A pause. I don't have a lawyer. I had one. He moved to Denver. Wes looked at the table. The nearest lawyer who will take the case now is in Laramie. I've been corresponding with him. It's expensive. And the marriage, Clara said, how does that change his position? He was pushing me toward marrying Delia. If I had, Granger's words not mine, it would have simplified the property situation considerably. Meaning I'd have married into his family, and eventually the ranch would be absorbed one way or another. Wes looked at her steadily. I refused. He escalated the legal pressure. I think marrying you, outside his arrangement, is going to make him escalate again. What does that look like? I don't know exactly. He has a judge in his pocket, a territorial judge named Alderman, based in Cheyenne. I think he'll find a way to put our marriage in front of him. Clara looked at the table. She was thinking about the paper that was inside Wes's coat, the one Aldous Ferris had signed in his kitchen at 10:30 on a stormy January night. She was thinking about everything she had left behind in Beaumont County and everything she had decided to build here, and a man named Granger who had decided that everything in this part of the world was eventually going to belong to him one way or another. Then we'd better make sure there's nothing he can use, she said. Wes looked at her. He'll look for any angle. He'll argue it was a marriage of convenience, that it isn't real. Then we make it real, Clara said simply. Not performed. Actually real. The work, the household, the children. All of it. That's not something you can fake well enough to fool a judge who isn't already against you. Wes was quiet for a moment. You're thinking about this clearly. I've had practice thinking clearly when I'm scared, she said. It's a useful skill. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Something between respect and something more private than that. Something he wasn't going to name yet, and neither was she. All right, he said. Outside, the February wind pressed against the house with its old insistence, and somewhere upstairs a floorboard creaked under the weight of a child moving around before sleep, and the kitchen held its warmth against the cold, and Clara sat across from her husband of 6 weeks and understood that what she had said was true. They needed to make this real, and that real things were built slowly, out of ordinary days, out of hard work and honest words and small moments of held doors and shared silences, and the particular courage it took to stay put when leaving would have been easier. She was not leaving. She had decided that in the snow outside the Ironwood Saloon, and she decided it again now, sitting in the kitchen of a ranch that was hers in law and was becoming hers in something deeper than law, and she was going to fight for it with everything she had, for the household she was building, for the children she was learning, for the man across the table who was also slowly learning her back. Silas Granger had made a significant miscalculation. He had looked at Clara Ashford, a widow with 43 cents and a split bag, and seen nothing worth worrying about. He had not yet understood what she was made of. The summons arrived on a Tuesday in early March, delivered by a man on a gray horse who handed it to Wes at the front gate without dismounting and rode away before anyone could ask him anything. Wes stood in the yard and read it twice. Then he folded it and came inside and set it on the kitchen table without a word, and Clara dried her hands and picked it up and read it herself. It was issued from the Territorial Court of Wyoming, signed by Judge Harlan Alderman of Cheyenne. It named Wesley James Calder and Clara May Calder, née Ashford, as respondents in a petition filed by Silas Granger, challenging the validity of their marriage on grounds of fraud and coercion. The hearing was set for April 4th, 4 weeks away, to be held in the county seat at Millhaven, 32 miles south. Clara read it through to the end and set it back down on the table. Alderman, she said. Granger's judge, Wes said. He was standing near the window with his arms crossed, looking at the middle distance. I told you he'd find a way. You did. She looked at the summons again. Fraud and coercion. What specifically is he claiming? He'll argue the marriage was contracted under duress, that you had no real choice, given your circumstances, and that I manufactured the situation to block his legal strategy, which makes the marriage an instrument of fraud rather than a genuine union. Wes's jaw moved. He's not entirely wrong about how it started. No, Clara said, he's not. That was the thing that sat between them for a moment. The plain fact of it, the thing neither of them could argue around. The marriage had started as necessity. It had been honest necessity, no coercion in it that Clara could identify, but necessity all the same, and a judge who was already inclined toward Granger's position would look at a widow with 43 cents who married a rancher in a snowstorm and see exactly the story Granger wanted him to see. "We need that lawyer in Laramie," Clara said. "I wrote to him last week, when I heard Granger had been making inquiries." Wes finally turned from the window. "His name is Dunmore, James Dunmore. He's good, from what I understand. He'll want a retainer." "How much?" "More than I have liquid right now. I'd need to pull from the cattle fund, the money set aside for the spring purchase." "Then pull it," Clara said. "That affects the whole year's operation." "Wes," she looked at him directly, "if Granger wins this in court, there won't be a year's operation to protect. Pull the money and write to Dunmore today." He looked at her. Then he nodded once and went to write the letter. Well, James Dunmore arrived at the ranch 12 days later, which was faster than Clara had expected and suggested either that he understood the urgency or that the retainer had been persuasive, possibly both. He was a compact man of about 50 with a precisely trimmed beard and the kind of stillness that Clara associated with people who did most of their important work inside their own heads before they said anything out loud. He carried a leather case that looked like it had been to a great many courtrooms, and he accepted coffee and sat at the kitchen table and read through the summons and the land title documents and the marriage certificate with the same concentrated patience he probably gave everything. When he finished, he set the papers down and folded his hands. "Tell me about the night of the marriage," he said. "Both of you. Everything." So they told him. Clara told it first. The stagecoach, the coins, the hotel, Harriet Flood, the kitchen, the saloon, the conversation at the corner table. Wes told his part, the children, the road north, the calculation he'd been turning over for 6 months, the moment he'd decided to ask Harriet if she knew anyone who might be willing. Dunmore listened without interrupting. When they finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You shook hands," he said. "Yes," Clara said, "like a business arrangement." "That's what it was. At the time." Dunmore looked at her steadily. "And now?" Clara glanced at Wes, not performing anything, just a natural movement. "Now it's something more than that. Can you describe what that looks like practically? Day to day?" "She keeps the accounts," Wes said. "Runs the household. She's been working on the supply situation since January. We're better positioned for the rest of winter than we've been in 2 years." A pause. "She's good with the children." "Eli likes her," Dunmore said, who had met Eli briefly on arriving and apparently registered the way the boy had attached himself to Clara's vicinity without being asked. "What about the daughter?" A beat. "We're getting there," Clara said. Dunmore made a note. "Granger's lawyer will argue that the practical details are exactly the point, that you arranged a functional partnership to mimic a real marriage specifically to frustrate the legal challenge. He'll say you both knew what you were doing and why, which makes the intent fraudulent regardless of the execution." "That's a stretch," Wes said. "It is, but Alderman will be inclined to let him stretch." Dunmore set down his pen. "The strongest counterargument is not that the marriage was romantic from the start. A judge won't believe that, and you shouldn't try to sell it. The strongest argument is that a marriage that begins practically and develops genuinely over time is still a valid marriage. The law does not require love as a precondition. It requires consent and intent to be lawfully married. You had both. Everything that has grown from it since is additional evidence, not primary." "So we tell the truth," Clara said. "You tell the precise truth in the most useful order," Dunmore said. "There's a difference." He looked at her. "Mrs. Calder, Granger's lawyer is going to try to make you look like a desperate woman who was taken advantage of. He's going to point to your circumstances in Red Hollow and argue you had no real capacity to consent freely." "I had full capacity," Clara said evenly. "I was poor, not incapacitated." "I know that. You'll need to make the judge know it too." A pause. "He may also bring up your first marriage, the Ashford family's position." Something tightened in Clara's chest, but she kept her voice level. "I expected that. It will be uncomfortable." I've had an uncomfortable few months, she said. I'll manage. Dunmore looked at her for a moment with something that was not quite professional detachment. Yes, he said. I think you will. The 4 weeks between the summons and the hearing were the strangest of Clara's life, and she had recently had some very strange weeks. The work of the ranch continued. It had no interest in the legal calendar, and so she split her attention between the daily labor of keeping the household running and the long evenings at the kitchen table with Dunmore's notes, preparing for questions she might be asked, rehearsing not answers exactly but clarity, the ability to say the true thing without fumbling for it under pressure. Wes was quieter than usual, which she had come to recognize as his version of worry. He did not pace. He did not snap at anyone. He went about his work with a focused, slightly compressed energy, like a man walking carefully on uncertain ground. One evening, she came in from the barn and found him sitting at the table with Meredith's photograph in his hands, a small framed picture she had seen once on the mantelpiece and once moved and then left where it was. He set it down when she came in, not hastily, just set it down. Sorry, he said, which she did not entirely understand. Don't be, she said. I keep thinking... He stopped, tried again. I keep thinking she'd have handled this better, the Granger situation. She thought faster than me, in a room full of people. You handle it differently, Clara said. That's not the same as worse. He looked at the photograph. She would have liked you, I think. She liked people who said what they meant. Clara sat down across from him. This was the most he had said about Meredith directly, to her, and she understood it as a kind of trust, the particular trust of a man who was private by nature, choosing to be less so. Tell me something about her, she said, if you want to. He was quiet for a moment. She laughed too loud, he said finally. It embarrassed her. She'd cover her mouth after, like she was trying to take it back. A slight pause. She was the one who named the ranch. I just called it the North property. She said it needed a name or it didn't have a character. Called her ranch, Clara said. She said if it had our name on it, we'd fight harder to keep it. He looked at the table. She was right about that too. Clara looked at him across the table. She was thinking that this man, this contained, plain-spoken, complicated man, had lost a great deal and was still standing, and that there was something in that she respected more than she had words for yet. We're going to keep it, she said. The ranch. I want you to know I mean that. Not because of the legal situation or what Dunmore needs us to say, because it's ours. Wes looked at her, and his expression was the open one, the one she only occasionally saw when his guard came down without him planning for it to. Ours, he said, testing the word slightly. Unless you're going to argue with me about it, she said. He didn't argue. He picked up the photograph and set it back on the mantelpiece where it belonged, and they sat together at the table for a while after that, not talking much, which had started to feel, somewhere in the past 6 weeks, like its own kind of conversation. Millhaven was bigger than Red Hollow, but not by much. A county seat town with a proper courthouse, a hotel that had 2 floors and working heat, and on the morning of April 4th, a street full of people who had heard there was something worth watching and had turned out accordingly. Word had traveled, the way word always traveled in small places. Granger versus Calder, the widow and the marriage and the water rights underneath all of it. People took sides the way they took sides in such things, not always on the merits, but on the basis of who they feared and who they were willing to stand behind. Clara had not expected the crowd. She sat in the wagon beside Wes as they came down the main street and felt the eyes on them, and she kept her back straight and her hands still in her lap and her face composed, because composure was the one thing she could control completely, and she intended to. Abigail and Eli had stayed at the ranch with Cordero. That had been the plan. It had been Dunmore's plan specifically. Keep the children out of this. We don't want it to look like we're using them. And Clara had agreed, and Wes had agreed, and they had told the children the night before that they were going to Millhaven and would be back by evening, and that Cordero would be there the whole time. Eli had accepted this with the trust of a child who had not yet learned to be suspicious of adult explanations. Abigail had said nothing, which, Clara was learning, meant she was thinking very hard. The Millhaven courthouse was a rectangular building of pale stone that tried and mostly failed to look imposing. The courtroom inside was a single large room with high windows that let in a thin April light, benches for observers filling the back two-thirds, and a raised bench at the front where Judge Harlan Alderman sat with the settled authority of a man who had been given power in this room and had no intention of letting anyone forget it. He was older than Clara had expected, mid-60s, with white hair and heavy eyebrows, and a face that gave nothing away. She watched him for signs of the bias Dunmore had described and could not read them. That, she thought, was probably the point. Silas Granger sat at the petitioner's table with his lawyer, a younger man named Reeves, who had the sharp, expensive look of someone brought in from somewhere larger. Granger himself was what Clara had imagined from the picture Cordero and Wes had painted, a broad, prosperous man of about 60 who had the confidence of someone who had not heard the word no from anyone who mattered in a very long time. He looked at Wes with the flat expression of a man who considered this hearing a formality, and he looked at Clara with something that was almost not an expression at all, like she was a variable in an equation rather than a person. She looked back at him steadily until he looked away first. Dunmore leaned slightly toward her. "Don't stare him down in front of the judge," he murmured. "He started it," she said quietly. "I know, don't." She moved her eyes to the front of the room. Reeves opened for Granger with a statement that was smooth and well-constructed and designed to sound like reason while being something else entirely. He described the marriage as a calculated transaction. A vulnerable widow, alone in a blizzard with no resources, offered a contract she could not realistically refuse. He used the word coercion twice in the first 5 minutes without ever technically accusing Wes of anything criminal, which Clara recognized as a particular kind of legal skill she would have admired in different circumstances. He described the timing, the storm, the same evening, the justice of the peace in his nightclothes, as evidence of haste inconsistent with genuine matrimonial intent. "The petitioner will demonstrate," Reeves said, with his hands folded and his voice carrying easily to the back of the room, "that this marriage was arranged not out of any genuine desire for union, but as a legal instrument to frustrate a legitimate property claim, that it was entered into by a man under financial pressure for strategic reasons, and by a woman under personal duress for reasons of pure survival. The law does not recognize such a union as valid, and this court should not either." He sat down. Alderman looked at Dunmore. "Counsel for respondents." Dunmore rose. He was not a theatrical man, which Clara had initially worried about and now thought might be the right approach entirely. He stood at the front of the room and spoke the way he did everything, with a measured, calm precision that did not reach for effect. "Your Honor, the respondents will stipulate to most of the facts the petitioner has described. Yes, the marriage was contracted quickly. Yes, Mrs. Calder's circumstances were difficult. Yes, Mr. Calder had practical reasons for seeking a wife beyond the romantic." Dunmore paused. "What the petitioner cannot demonstrate, because it is not true, is that either party lacked the freedom or intent to enter this marriage as a lawful union. Consent does not require comfort to be valid. Practical motivation does not negate genuine commitment. And a marriage that has grown into something real over the months since January is not retroactively invalidated by the circumstances of its beginning." He let that sit for a moment. "We will show the court what the Calder household actually is, not what the petitioner wishes it to be." He sat down. Alderman's eyebrows moved slightly, not enough to read clearly. Reeves called Wes to the stand first, which Dunmore had predicted and prepared for. The questioning was careful and relentless, working over the timeline of the storm and the conversation in the saloon and the reasoning behind the marriage until it had the texture of a transaction in the record, amounts and terms and calculated outcomes. Wes answered in the flat, unembellished way he had, which Clara thought was actually his best quality in this room. He didn't oversell. He didn't reach for sympathy. He said what was true. "You had no prior acquaintance with the respondent Clara Ashford before the evening of January 17th, Reeves said. "None," Wes said. "You made the decision to propose marriage to her within approximately 2 hours of meeting her." "Yes." "And this was motivated, at least in part, by your awareness of the ongoing legal challenge to your property title." "It was one factor." "One factor," Reeves repeated, letting that phrase do work. "What were the others?" "My children need someone," Wes said. "The ranch needs someone who can help run it. And I was tired of being maneuvered into a position I hadn't chosen. A beat. Those are the factors. You were tired, Reeves said pleasantly. Of Granger's methods, Wes said. Yes. Alderman made a sound that might have been something, and Reeves moved on. When Dunmore had his turn with Wes, he kept it brief. Mr. Calder, in the month since January, has your household functioned as a family? Yes. Has Mrs. Calder taken on the responsibilities of running that household? Yes. More than I expected and better than I could have managed. Do you consider her your wife in the full sense of that word? Wes was quiet for 1 second. Not hesitation, but wait. Yes, he said. I do. Clara took the stand after the midday recess. She had been in courtrooms before, twice, briefly in Beaumont County in the process of the Ashford estate disposition, and she had disliked them both times for the same reason. The feeling of being examined like evidence rather than spoken to like a person. She had that feeling now, walking to the stand, but she had decided on the road to Millhaven that she was not going to perform anything for anyone in this room. Not confidence, not softness, not anything calculated for effect. She would just tell the truth in the clearest language she had. Reeves approached her with the particular solicitude of a man who intended to dismantle her while appearing to treat her gently. Mrs. Calder, or Mrs. Ashford as you were known, on the evening of January 17th, can you describe your financial situation? 43 cents, she said. I'm sorry? That was my financial situation. 43 cents and a travel bag with a broken strap. A ripple in the observer benches. Reeves absorbed it. And in that situation, with no money, no shelter, a blizzard arriving, when a man offered you a home and a legal arrangement, would you describe yourself as having a genuine free choice? Yes, Clara said. Reeves paused. You would. I had a choice between saying yes and saying no. That is a free choice. Difficult circumstances don't remove a person's agency. They just make the decision more serious. She kept her voice even. I took it seriously. Were you aware at the time that Mr. Calder's motivations were, in part, to counter the legal challenge to his property? Yes. He told me directly. And you agreed to participate in that strategy. I agreed to marry him, Claire said. The fact that the marriage had practical benefits for both of us doesn't change what it is. What it is, Reeves repeated, or what you'd like a court to believe it is. Dunmore was on his feet. Argumentative. Sustained, Alderman said, and Clara registered the word with a careful neutrality and kept her eyes on Reeves. He shifted his approach, and she felt it coming before it arrived. Mrs. Calder, your first husband, Thomas Ashford, died in November. His family subsequently determined that you had no claim to the estate. That's correct. You arrived in the Wyoming Territory with essentially nothing. Yes. And you had, prior to this marriage, no means of supporting yourself. I had the ability to work, which I was doing when I met Mr. Calder. I was employed in the Ironwood Saloon kitchen. For 2 days, Reeves said pleasantly. It had been a long week, Clara said, and heard the benches stir again. Reeves did not smile. The point, Mrs. Calder, is that you were in an extremely vulnerable position. I was in a difficult position, she said. There is a difference. Vulnerable implies I was unable to make a clear decision. I was cold and I was poor and I was tired, but my mind was working fine. She saw something in his eyes shift, a small recalibration. He had expected either more defensiveness or more deference, and she was giving him neither. Let me ask you plainly, he said. Did you marry Wesley Calder because you wanted to, or because you felt you had no other option? Clara looked at him steadily. I married him because it was the best decision available to me, which is the same reason most people get married, if they're being honest. The difference is that I knew my reasons clearly, and he knew his, and we were honest with each other about them from the start. That's more than a lot of marriages have. The benches behind her were very quiet. Reeves tried 2 more angles and found the same thing at each one. She did not fold, and she did not reach for sympathy, and she would not say anything that was not precisely true. After 15 minutes, he sat down. Dunmore stood. Mrs. Calder, he said, In the months you've lived on the Calder Ranch, what has your role been in the household? I manage the kitchen and the domestic accounts. I've been rebuilding the supply situation, which was depleted. I care for the children, Eli and Abigail. I help with the animals when needed. I do whatever the day requires, and so does everyone else. Do you consider yourself a part of that family? Something moved in her chest, a feeling she had not expected to be as large as it was. Yes, she said. I do. How would you characterize your relationship with Mr. Calder's daughter, Abigail? Difficult and improving, Clara said. She's a smart girl who is protective of her family and skeptical of change. I think those are good qualities in a person. We're learning each other. And his son? Eli told me last week that I make better biscuits than his sister. A brief pause. I'm not sure that's a legal standard, but it means something to me. There was actual laughter in the benches. Alderman let it settle without intervening, which Clara noted. Dunmore nodded. Thank you, Mrs. Calder. No further questions. She did not expect what happened next. She had stepped down from the stand and returned to her seat beside Wes, and Dunmore was preparing to call his first witness, Harriet Flood, who had made the trip from Red Hollow and was sitting in the observer benches in her best wool coat with an expression that suggested she was prepared to say exactly what she thought and didn't particularly care who heard it. The door at the back of the courtroom opened. Clara heard it and did not turn immediately. Then she heard Wes make a sound. Not a word, just a sound. And she turned. Abigail and Eli were standing at the back of the courtroom. Abigail had Eli's hand, and she was holding it with a grip that communicated very clearly that she was the one who had decided this, and she was not uncertain about it. She was still in her riding clothes, which meant they had come on horseback, which meant Abigail had saddled the horses herself and left Cordero behind and brought her brother 32 miles because she had made a decision. The courtroom was looking at them. Alderman was looking at them. Granger was looking at them with an expression that was for the first time not entirely controlled. Abigail looked at the front of the room with her jaw set and her eyes steady, and then she looked at Clara. Clara looked back at her. Dunmore was on his feet. Your Honor, the respondents would request permission to call 2 additional witnesses who have just arrived. Reeves was on his feet half a second later. Objection. These witnesses were not listed. They are members of the respondent household, Dunmore said, and his voice was level and quiet and carried exactly as far as it needed to. Their testimony is directly relevant to the question before this court. They came of their own volition. I believe the court should hear them. Alderman looked at Abigail and Eli at the back of the room for a long moment. His eyebrows moved, not dramatically, but with purpose. I'll allow it, he said. Reeves, you'll have opportunity to question both. Bailiff, get those children a seat. Eat. Eli went first because Abigail had clearly decided this was the appropriate order. He sat in the witness chair with his feet not quite touching the floor and his coat still buttoned and his face very serious in the way of an 8-year-old who understood that something important was happening and had decided to meet it with everything he had. Dunmore crouched slightly to be closer to eye level, which Clara noticed and appreciated. Eli, can you tell the court about the person who lives at your ranch with you and your father and your sister? Eli thought about this with visible seriousness. That's Clara, he said. What is Clara like? She's good at fixing things. She fixed the pump when it was stuck, and she fixed Compass's leg when he got cut. That's my horse. She showed Abby how to check the bandage. He paused. She doesn't burn the biscuits. Abby burns them, but she tries not to. Does your father seem different since Clara came to live with you? Eli considered. He laughs more. Not a lot more, but more than before. A pause. Before he was mostly just working, all the time. He still works a lot, but sometimes now he talks at supper. Do you want Clara to stay? Yes, Eli said, with the directness of someone who had not yet learned to qualify things. She's ours. Reeves declined to cross-examine an 8-year-old, which was probably the right calculation. Abigail took the stand. She sat the way she did most things. Straight, self-contained, braced. She looked at the room with the expression Clara knew, the controlled one. Then she looked at Reeves and she looked at Granger, and her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. Dunmore asked her the same opening question, and she answered it the same way. Clara. And then Dunmore asked her to describe what had changed in the household since January. Abigail was quiet for a moment. She doesn't pretend, Abigail said finally. She told me straight out in the stable that she wasn't trying to replace my mother. Most adults, they think if they're nice enough, you'll just accept things. She didn't do that. She just said what was true and let me figure out the rest. Has that changed how you feel about her? I still don't. It's not. Abigail stopped. Tried again. Clara watched her and felt something ache. I was angry when Papa told us. I'm still a little angry because he didn't ask us. But Clara didn't do anything wrong. She takes care of things. She takes care of Eli. She takes care of the whole ranch, actually. She takes care of Papa. A pause. She stays up late doing the accounts when she thinks everyone is asleep. I've seen her. Why do you think she does that? Because she wants the ranch to be okay, Abigail said. She doesn't have anywhere else to go, but I don't think that's the only reason anymore. I think she's trying. A beat. Her voice was steady, but only just. I think she's actually trying. The courtroom was extremely quiet. Abigail, Dunmore said gently, do you want this family to stay together? Yes, she said. Not elaborated, just said. The single word of a girl who had already lost one thing she couldn't replace and knew exactly what she was saying when she said she did not want to lose another. When Abigail stepped down, she walked to the respondent's table and stood beside it, and after a moment Clara put her hand on the girl's shoulder, not reaching, not pulling her in, just placing it there, steadily, and Abigail did not move away. Alderman deliberated for just over an hour. When he returned, he looked at both tables with the expression of a man who had made a decision he had not necessarily expected to make when the morning started. The petition to invalidate the marriage of Wesley and Clara Calder is denied, he said. His voice was even and gave nothing extra. The court finds that while the circumstances of the marriage's formation were unconventional, there is insufficient evidence of fraud or coercion as defined under territorial law. The respondents demonstrated credible consent, mutual intent, and an ongoing functioning family unit. Reeves started to rise. Alderman held up a hand. However, a pause that was deliberate and weighted. Given the brevity of this marriage at the time of petition, the court will order a period of review. The respondents will appear before this court in 6 months, October 4th, at which time the court will make a final determination on the validity of this union. During this period, no property actions contingent on the marriage's validity may be initiated by any party. He looked at Granger's table with something that might have been a warning and might have been nothing. Both parties are bound by this order. Court is adjourned. He struck the gavel. The room came alive with sound. The benches, movement, voices overlapping. Clara sat very still in it for a moment and felt the specific shape of what had just happened. Not a victory exactly, but not a loss. 6 months. 6 months of living under the review, under the watching, with Granger still out there and Alderman still technically uncommitted, and the whole thing hanging on what October 4th looked like. Wes put his hand over hers on the table. She looked at it, then at him. 6 months, he said. We've managed 4, she said. He looked at her steadily. We have. Abigail was still standing beside Clara's chair. Eli had made his way from the benches and was now simply leaning against Clara's other side with the complete physical confidence of a child who had decided where he belonged, and Clara put her arm around him and held him there. And across the table, Silas Granger was speaking in a low, clipped voice to Reeves, and the courtroom was emptying, and the April light was coming through the high windows and falling across the floor in pale rectangles, and none of it was resolved, and none of them were safe yet. But they were still standing, all 4 of them, together. And for today, Claire decided, that was the thing to hold on to. They rode home from Millhaven mostly in silence, which was not the uncomfortable kind. Eli fell asleep in his wagon bed before they cleared the town limits, wrapped in the blanket Clara had thought to bring and curled against the sideboards with the complete physical surrender of a child who had spent his entire emotional reserve and had nothing left to spend. Abigail sat in the back beside him with her hand resting near his shoulder, not quite touching, but close enough that if the wagon hit a rut, she would catch him. Clara sat up front beside Wes on the bench, a foot of cool April air between them, and watched the road unspool ahead in the late afternoon light. After a while, Wes said, "She saddled those horses herself." "I know." Cordero said she had them ready before he understood what she was doing. Said she told him she was going to Millhaven and he could come or stay, but she wasn't asking permission. Clara looked at the road. She's her mother's daughter. She felt rather than saw the way he absorbed that. A slight shift in his posture, something releasing rather than tightening. "Yeah," he said, "she is." They didn't talk much after that, but when the wagon hit a rough stretch and Clara reached out to brace against the benchboard, her hand landed near his on the wood, and neither of them moved away, and that was something too, even if neither of them named it yet. The 6 months of review settled over the ranch like a second weather system, always present, always in the background, shaping what they did even when it wasn't spoken of directly. Dunmore had written with clear instructions: live your lives, document what you can, don't do anything that looks like performance. The court isn't watching your daily routine, he wrote, but Granger may have people who are. The best thing you can do is simply be what you are. What they were by April was a family in the practical sense and something approaching one in the deeper sense. Not finished, not without friction, but real in the way that mattered. The work was real. The meals were real. The arguments were real when they happened, and they did happen, because 4 people living in close quarters through a hard season did not agree about everything and were not always at their best. The argument about the north fence was the first real one. It was a Tuesday in late April, and Wes had come in from the pasture in the late afternoon with mud on his boots and a specific set to his jaw that Clara had learned to read as the prelude to a decision already made. "I'm going to pull the fence line back 40 yards on the north pasture," he said. "Move it to the ridge." Clara was at the table going over figures. She looked up. "That cuts our grazing area by about a fifth. It also moves the property line away from Granger's boundary claim. Dunmore thinks a smaller footprint is easier to defend if Alderman rules against us in October." "Dunmore thinks," Clara said. "Do you think?" He looked at her. "I think the law is uncertain and the land is real. If you pull that fence back, you're starting from a smaller position in October, whether Alderman rules for us or not. You're conceding ground before anyone asked you to." She set her pen down. "Granger's strategy has always been to make you smaller, one step at a time, until there's nothing left worth fighting for. Don't help him. It's a tactical retreat." "It's a retreat," she said. "I understand the difference between tactical and not. This one isn't." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a crow made noise about something and then stopped. "You've been running a ranch for 4 months," he said. Not cruelly, but said. "I've been running this ranch's accounts for 4 months," she said. "And I understand the numbers well enough to know that shrinking our productive capacity while we're already stretched from the legal costs is not a solution. It's a slow version of the same problem." He looked at her for a long time. She held his gaze and did not soften it. "What would you do instead?" he said. "Not as a criticism. I'm asking. Hold the line where it is and use the money we'd spend relocating the fence on getting Dunmore up here before October to review the original survey documents. If there's an irregularity in the 1861 grant, I want to know exactly what it is and whether it actually helps Granger or whether his lawyer is bluffing." She paused. "I think he's bluffing." "On what basis?" "On the basis that if the survey error were actually strong enough to void the title, he'd have taken it to court already instead of pressuring you into a private arrangement. He's using it as a threat because it works better as a threat than as a legal argument." Wes was quiet. The crow outside started again and stopped again. "I'll write to Dunmore," he said. "Good." "You could have just said that to start with," he said, "instead of the part about retreating." "You could have asked me before you decided," she said. Another silence, shorter this time. "Fair enough," he said, and went to wash up. And that was the end of it. Not smooth, not entirely comfortable, but over, and both of them still standing. That was how it went, more or less. They disagreed about the spring cattle purchase. She wanted fewer head, higher quality. He wanted volume, and split the difference, and it worked out approximately as well as either of them had predicted, which was to say imperfectly and adequately. They disagreed about Eli's schooling. There was a school teacher in Red Hollow now, new since February, and Clara thought Eli should make the ride 3 days a week if the weather allowed, and Wes worried about the road conditions and the time. And that one took longer to resolve, and was resolved in Clara's favor when Eli himself said plainly that he wanted to go, and Abigail said she'd ride with him on the bad days. It was Abigail who surprised Clara most, in the months between April and October. Not with any single moment. With the accumulation of small ones, a cup of coffee appearing at Clara's elbow when she was late to the table, set down without comment. A question about the accounts, genuinely curious, not looking for approval. The morning Abigail came to Clara before Wes with a problem she'd found in the barn, a section of roof starting to give, because, as she said with studied casualness, you notice things faster than Papa does. The evening, she asked Clara to look at a letter she was writing to her mother's sister in Missouri, the first she'd attempted, and sat very still while Clara read it, and then said, Does it say what I mean? Yes, Clara said, exactly what you mean. Abigail took the letter back. Okay, she said, and then, after a pause, thank you. 2 words. Clara held them carefully, the way you held something that was fragile, not because it was weak, but because it was new. She realized she was pregnant in the 2nd week of June. She sat with the knowledge for 3 days before she told anyone, which was probably 2 days longer than she should have, but she needed the time to feel the full shape of it without anyone else's reaction in the room. It was not a simple feeling. It was many feelings layered on each other, a kind of stunned, complicated joy at the center, and around that a ring of fear, and around the fear a history she had carried for 6 years, the months in Beaumont County, the family's cold conclusion about her worth, the particular grief of believing something was simply not possible for you. And it was possible. It was happening. And she was afraid and grateful and unsure in equal measure about all of it. She told Wes on a Thursday evening after supper when the children were upstairs and the kitchen was quiet. She just said it plainly the way she said most things, because there was no good way to dress it up and she didn't try. He went very still. Not the controlled stillness he used when he was managing something. A different kind. The stillness of a man who had just been struck by something large and was standing in the aftermath of it, trying to determine what was still standing. You're sure, he said. Yes. He looked at the table, then at the window, then at his hands. Wes, she said, say something. He stopped, started again. I'm trying to find the right thing to say. Say what's true. He looked at her then, and his face was open in a way she had only seen a few times. The photograph night, the road back from Millhaven, a morning in early May when Eli had fallen off the fence and scared them both badly, and Wes had held the boy for a long time after he was confirmed fine, just held him, not saying anything. The face underneath the one he usually wore. Meredith died in childbed, he said. It came out quiet and level and cost him something. With Eli, It went wrong at the end, and He stopped. I wasn't prepared. I thought I was, but I wasn't. I know, Claire said. She had known, in the general shape of it, since Cordero had told her early on. I don't know how to not be afraid of this, he said. I am glad. I'm genuinely glad, Clara, but I'm also afraid, she said. Yes. So am I, she said. I've been afraid for 3 days without telling you, which wasn't fair to either of us. She looked at him steadily. But I'm not Meredith. I don't mean that badly. I just mean that what happened before isn't what will happen this time, and we don't know yet what this time will be. And being afraid of it won't change the outcome. It'll just make the months harder. He was quiet for a long time. I know that, he said finally. The reasonable part of me knows that. The reasonable part is enough to start with, she said. The rest of it will work out. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers, and she turned her hand over and they sat like that for a while in the kitchen. That was theirs. In the house that was theirs, with the summer evening coming in at the windows and everything uncertain and everything, at the same time, more solid than it had ever been. They told the children the following Sunday. Eli's response was immediate and practical. He wanted to know if it was going to be a boy or a girl, and when Clara said they wouldn't know for some time, he said he thought a girl would be better because they already had him for the boy part. Abigail looked at her brother with an expression that was equal parts exasperation and fondness. And then she looked at Clara. "Are you all right?" she said. Direct, careful, genuine. "Yes," Clara said. "So far." Abigail nodded slowly. "Okay." A pause. "I'll do the heavy lifting in the kitchen. You shouldn't be doing that in the mornings." "I can manage." "I know you can," Abigail said in a tone that had a slight, unmistakable edge of, "Don't argue with me about this." "I'm saying I'll do it." Clara looked at her for a moment. "All right," she said. "Thank you." Abigail went back to what she'd been doing, and Wes caught Clara's eye across the room with a look that said, quietly, "I told you she was her mother's daughter," and Clara looked back with a look that said she knew. It was Dunmore who told them about Delia Granger. He came up to the ranch in late July with the survey documents and 2 pieces of news. The first was about the survey. He had found, after considerable work, that the 1861 irregularity was exactly what Clara had suspected, a notational error in the boundary description that had been corrected in an 1863 supplemental filing and was legally superseded. Granger's lawyer had almost certainly known this. The threat had been a bluff. "You were right," Wes said, looking at Clara. "I was guessing," she said, "but yes." The second piece of news was less straightforward. Dunmore sat at the kitchen table with his coffee and told them that he had, through a contact in Cheyenne, received information that Silas Granger's cattle operation was under significant financial strain. 3 years of aggressive expansion had outpaced his revenue. He had borrowed heavily against his land holdings, and at least 2 of his creditors were becoming restless. The legal campaign against the Calders had continued to cost money he was less and less able to absorb. "And his daughter," Dunmore said carefully. "Delia Granger. She's 23. She was the intended piece of the plan, as you know. Marry her to Wes, consolidate the property. She apparently had her own views on this arrangement." "Did she?" Wes said flatly. "She refused it," Dunmore said. "I don't have the details, but I'm told there was a significant falling out between her and her father in May, and she's been living with her mother's cousin in Laramie since June." He paused. "She also, reportedly, provided Granger's primary creditor with information about certain accounting irregularities in his operation. Whether that's true or how significant it is, I can't confirm, but Granger's position is weaker than it was in April." The kitchen was quiet for a moment. "She turned on him," Claire said. "It appears so." Dunmore folded his hands. "The relevance for you is that Granger may be less inclined toward an expensive legal fight in October than he was in the spring. He's not defeated. He still has resources, and he still has aldermen. But his motivation to spend money on a battle he may not win has likely decreased." "Or he gets more desperate," Wes said. "That's possible too," Dunmore said honestly. "Men like Granger don't always calculate rationally when they feel cornered." August was the hardest month, not because of Granger. He was quiet, which Wes said was more unnerving than noise, but because of the pregnancy which stopped being manageable and became genuinely difficult somewhere around the middle of the month. Clara was sick in the mornings, which she had expected, and exhausted in a way that was new and not entirely controllable, and there were 3 days in the 3rd week of August where she could not do the full weight of her usual work and had to accept help, which did not come naturally to her. Abigail ran the kitchen those 3 days with a competence that was startling and, Clara thought, had probably been there all along, waiting for room to operate. She burned 1 batch of biscuits. "The stove ran hot," she said, with dignity. "And everything else was fine." Wes was careful with her in a way that was different from his usual practicality. He carried things before she could reach them. He came in from the barn at midday to check on her, which he had never done before. And when she said she was fine, he said, "I know, I'm checking anyway," and went back out. She understood what it cost him, the watching, the specific fear he was managing underneath the practical concern. And she did not minimize it or dismiss it, just let him check and said she was fine because she was, and let that be what it was. One night in late August, she woke at 3 in the morning from some dream she couldn't hold on to, and she lay in the dark and listened to the ranch breathe. The animals in the barn, the wind in the grass, the old timber of the house settling, and she thought about all the versions of herself that had existed over the past year. The woman on the stagecoach with 43 cents, the woman in the saloon kitchen, stirring stew and wondering how the arithmetic of her life was going to work out. The woman who had shaken hands across a table with a stranger and said all right and meant it, and had not known, could not have known, what was on the other side of that decision. She put her hand on her stomach and felt the movement there, a certainty, a presence, and thought, "You are the thing I did not expect." She was 38 years old, and she was afraid, and she was exactly where she was supposed to be. And those things were all true at the same time, and she held them together in the dark and did not try to resolve them into something simpler than they were. Granger came to the ranch in September. He came alone, which surprised everyone, and he came in the middle of a working day when Wes was out on the south pasture and Clara was in the yard with Abigail looking at a section of the kitchen garden they were putting in for fall planting. He rode up the main track on a big roan horse and stopped at the gate and looked at the ranch with an expression Clara could not entirely read from that distance. She walked to the gate. He looked older than he had in the courtroom. Not dramatically. A few weeks was not enough for drama. But something had shifted in his face, some of the settled confidence replaced by something more tired. "Mrs. Calder," he said. "Mr. Granger," she said. "Is your husband here?" "He'll be back within the hour. You're welcome to wait." He looked at her steadily. "I'd like to speak with him." "You can speak with me," she said. "I'm not a secretary. Whatever you have to say to this ranch, you can say to either of us." Something moved in his expression. Not quite what she expected, not quite irritation, something more complicated. "You're not what I expected," he said. "People keep saying that," she said. "I've never been entirely sure what they expected." He was quiet for a moment. His horse shifted and he steadied it without looking down. "I'm going to withdraw the petition," he said. Clara kept her face still. "The October hearing," he said. "I'm instructing Reeves to file a withdrawal. It'll be on Alderman's desk this week." "Why?" she said. He looked at the ranch, at the house, the barn, the fence lines, the pasture beyond, at the work of it, the real, accumulated, daily work that was visible if you looked. "Because I've run the numbers," he said, "and the numbers don't work anymore. Legal costs, the survey issue, Reeves told me about the 1863 filing last month. I should have been told sooner." A pause. "And because I've been in this fight long enough to know when it's done." "That's a practical reason," Clara said. "Is that the only one?" He looked at her, and for a moment she saw something in his face that was not the man from the courtroom, not the broad, prosperous, untouchable figure who had looked at her like a variable. Something older and less certain. "My daughter," he said. Not elaborated, just said, the way Wes said things that cost him something. "I heard she's in Laramie," Clara said. "Yes." He picked up his reins. "Tell your husband I'll have the paperwork filed by Friday. The title challenge goes with it. I won't be pursuing the water rights through legal means." He paused. "I may make another offer to purchase at some point, at fair market value." "You can make the offer," Clara said. "The answer will probably be the same as before, but you can make it." He looked at her one more time, a long, assessing look that had something different in it now, something like the beginning of reluctant respect. "Good day, Mrs. Calder," he said. "Good day," she said. He turned the roan and rode back down the track, and Clara stood at the gate and watched him go and felt the strange deflation of attention she had been carrying so long it had become part of the structure of her days. She put her hand on the gatepost and took one slow breath. "Clara." She turned. Abigail had come up beside her quietly and was standing a few feet away, watching the retreating horse. "Is it over?" she said. "I think so," Clara said. "The legal part." Abigail looked at the empty track where Granger had been. "His daughter told him," she said. Not a question. "Probably." "Good," Abigail said, with a simplicity and a certainty that Clara thought was one of the most clarifying things she had heard in a long time. Well, Wes came in from the south pasture an hour later, and Clara told him in the kitchen, matter-of-factly, and watched his face go through several things without words. He sat down at the table and put both hands flat on the wood and looked at them. "He came here," he said. "He did." "Alone?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "What did you say to him?" "Not much. Mostly I listened." Wes looked up at her. "You're the one who got him to come," he said. Not the lawyers, not the court. You. He got himself here, she said. I just didn't make it harder for him to say what he came to say. Wes looked at her across the kitchen table, and the expression on his face was the open one, the one underneath all the others. And this time he didn't look away from it, and neither did she. Clara, he said. I know, she said, because she did. She had known for some time, in the way you knew things that grew slowly rather than arriving all at once, the way you knew the season was changing not from any single day, but from the cumulative weight of all the days together. He crossed the kitchen and stood in front of her and put his hands on her face the way someone handled something they had decided mattered to them. And he kissed her, and she kissed him back, and it was not a thing for ceremony or performance. It was just two people in a kitchen at the end of a hard year, choosing each other clearly and without conditions. When they separated, he kept his hands where they were for a moment. I should have said it before now, he said. You said it in the ways you knew how, she said. I wasn't in a hurry. You're more patient than I deserve. Probably, she said, and he made that sound, the one that was almost a laugh, that she had first heard in this kitchen in February and had been listening for ever since. The September evening settled around the ranch slowly and without drama. Cordero finished in the barn. Eli came in from the pasture with grass stains on both knees and a story about Compass that took 15 minutes to tell. Abigail set the table without being asked and only slightly burned one corner of the cornbread and said nothing about it, and neither did anyone else. They ate supper together at the kitchen table, all four of them, in the ordinary way of a family at the end of an ordinary day, except that nothing about this year had been ordinary and all of them knew it, and none of them said so, because some things don't need to be said to be understood. After supper, Eli fell asleep on the parlor floor in front of the stove, and Wes carried him upstairs with the practiced ease of a father who had done this 1,000 times, and Abigail washed the dishes beside Clara at the basin, their shoulders nearly touching in the small kitchen space, and neither of them moved away. Abigail, Clara said after a while. Yeah. I want you to know something. She kept her eyes on the basin. Whatever happens, October, the baby, any of it, you're not going to lose anything. Not your father, not this place, not your mother's memory. Nothing that matters is going anywhere. Abigail was quiet for a moment. The water moved between them. I know that, she said. Her voice was careful, but underneath the careful there was something younger and less defended. I know that now. Good, Clara said. Abigail handed her a dish to dry. I'm glad you got off that stagecoach, she said. And before Clara could respond to that, Abigail was already moving on. The pot's still dirty. I'll get it. In the way of someone who had said the true thing and was not going to make a production of it. Clara dried the dish and held the words quietly and let them settle into the category of things she would carry forward from this year. The things that had cost something to get and were worth exactly that cost, and not 1 cent less. Outside, the September dark came down over the Calder Ranch, over the pasture and the fencing and the creek that ran through the northeast corner and had always been theirs and was going to stay that way. And in the house, the lights burned in the windows against the dark. The way lights in windows always looked from a distance, warm and specific, and stubbornly present against whatever the night brought. Dunmore's letter arrived on a Wednesday in the last week of September, 8 days before the scheduled October 4th hearing. Clara read it at the kitchen table while the morning coffee was still hot, and then she read it again. And then she set it down and looked out the window at the pasture where the grass had gone the particular gold of early autumn, and she sat with it for a moment before she called Wes in from the yard. He read it standing up, the way he read things he wasn't sure about, as if remaining on his feet gave him some advantage over the words. Reeves had filed the withdrawal on Friday, as Granger had promised. Dunmore had confirmed it with the court clerk in Cheyenne on Monday. The petition to invalidate the Calder marriage was officially dismissed. The title challenge, filed separately 18 months ago, had been withdrawn simultaneously. Judge Alderman had accepted both withdrawals without comment, which Dunmore described as, and Clara could hear his precise, careful voice in the phrasing, the most neutrality he has shown in this matter from the beginning, and I will take it. The October 4th hearing would not happen. There was nothing left to hear. Wes set the letter on the table. It's done, he said. It's done, she said. He looked at her across the table. This woman who had arrived in his life during a blizzard with a split bag and 43 cents and a spine made of something he still did not have a word for. And he looked at her the way he had been looking at her since September, openly, without the old containment, and she looked back at him the same way. "I don't know what to do with a morning that doesn't have that over it," he said. "I do," she said. "We work." He almost smiled. "Yeah," he said, "we do." October came in cold and clear, the way the best October days did. The sky a hard, specific blue, the air with an edge to it that made everything feel more defined. The ranch looked different in that light, or maybe Clara saw it differently now that the legal shadow had lifted. The fencing Wes and Cordero had repaired through the summer, the kitchen garden she and Abigail had put in, most of it harvested now, the root vegetables in the cellar in neat rows. The barn roof patched properly in August. The corral where Compass moved with the particular self-assurance of a horse who knew exactly where he stood in the hierarchy of things. It was a working ranch in working order, and it was theirs without qualification, and that fact was simple and enormous at the same time. Clara was 8 months along by the first week of October, which made certain things difficult and made Wes watch her with an attention she had mostly stopped arguing with. She was not fragile. She had been very clear about this to everyone, including her own body, which had been mostly cooperative. But she was large and tired in a new way, and the mornings were slow, and she had accepted, without particularly enjoying the accepting, that there were tasks she needed to give to other people for the time being. Abigail had taken over the kitchen accounts without being asked, which Clara discovered one afternoon when she went to update the ledger and found it already done in Abigail's careful handwriting, with a notation at the bottom that said, "Cellar inventory updated. We need more lamp oil and nothing else by way of explanation." Clara looked at the ledger for a long time. She thought about a girl in a saloon at the back of a January night, rigid and watchful with her arms crossed, deciding already that she could not be touched by whatever was happening. She thought about a stable in Red Hollow and a horse with a cut leg, and the way Abigail had held the animal steady with both hands, and not once looked uncertain. She thought about a courtroom in Mill Haven and a 12-year-old standing at the back door with her brother's hand in hers, having ridden 32 miles because she had decided the family was worth riding for. People grew. That was the thing Clara had learned in this particular year, more clearly than she had ever known it. Not as an idea, but as a witnessed fact. People grew if you gave them room and told them the truth, and did not require them to be more finished than they were. She wrote "thank you," good catch on the lamp oil at the bottom of Abigail's notation, and closed the ledger. The baby came on a Thursday in the 3rd week of October, which was not the plan. The plan, such as it was, frontier medicine being what it was, had involved the midwife from Red Hollow, a woman named Mrs. Prentice who had delivered most of the children in the county for the past 15 years and had the unflappable quality of someone who had seen every possible version of this particular event and was not going to be surprised by any of them. Mrs. Prentice was supposed to arrive on the Monday of that week and stay through until the baby came. The baby did not consult this schedule. Clara woke at 4 in the morning on Thursday with the specific knowledge that something had shifted, and she lay in the dark for 20 minutes being certain about it before she woke Wes, because she was constitutionally unwilling to alarm anyone unnecessarily and needed to be sure she was not being dramatic. She was not being dramatic. Wes was awake and dressed and had Cordero on his horse toward Red Hollow before 5, and then he came back upstairs and stood in the doorway of the bedroom and looked at Clara with an expression that was the most unguarded she had ever seen on him. Every wall down, every piece of containment gone, just a man standing in a doorway being afraid and present at the same time. "Wes," she said. "I'm all right," he said. He was clearly not entirely all right. "Come sit down," she said. Is there something I should be doing?" "You should come sit down," she said. "Mrs. Prentice will get here when she gets here. Right now, I would like you to sit down and talk to me." He came and sat on the edge of the bed, and she could feel the tension in him from there, the specific quality of a man holding himself very carefully in place. "Tell me something," she said. "Tell me about Meredith. About when Eli was born." He looked at her. "I'm asking you to tell me," she said, "because I think it's sitting between us, and I'd rather it was out where we can see it." He was quiet for a long moment. The dark outside was beginning to thin slightly toward the east. That first, almost imperceptible loosening before the real gray of pre-dawn. "It was fast," he said, "faster than anyone expected. And then something went wrong and He stopped, pressed his hands together. "She was alive at midnight and she was gone by 2 in the morning, and I was standing in this room and Eli was in his cradle and I couldn't." He stopped again. "Wes," she said quietly. "I know you're not her," he said. "I know that. I know you're not. I'm not confusing this. I just can't stop." "You don't have to stop," she said. "You're allowed to be afraid of this. You've earned the right to be afraid of it." She reached out and put her hand over his. "But I need you to stay in this room with me and not be somewhere else. Can you do that?" He looked at her. He took one long breath. "Yes," he said. "Good," she said. They sat together while the dark shifted toward gray outside, and Clara talked when she could and was quiet when she couldn't, and Wes stayed in the room, which was everything she had asked for and everything she needed. And when Abigail appeared in the doorway at 6:30, having heard enough through the walls to understand what was happening, Wes looked at her and said, "Would you sit with her for a few minutes?" Not quite a question. And Abigail came in without hesitation and sat on the other side of the bed and took Clara's hand and held it, which was not a thing she had ever done before. And Clara held it back and said nothing because there was nothing to say that the holding didn't already say better. Mrs. Prentice arrived at 8:30 and took charge of the room with the brisk, unworried efficiency of someone who had done this a great many times and knew which emergencies were actual emergencies and which were not. This, she declared within 10 minutes of arrival, was not an emergency. She said this to Wes specifically, in a tone that was not unkind but was absolutely not open to negotiation, and she told him he could be useful by keeping the stove going and the water hot and staying out of her way, and he went to do exactly that with the expression of a man who was grateful to have a task. It was a long day, not catastrophic. Mrs. Prentice said several times that everything was as it should be, and Clara believed her because the woman had no discernible reason to lie and a very discernible manner of telling the truth, but long and hard, and not the kind of thing Clara would describe afterward as anything other than exactly what it was. She was 30 years old, and she was strong, and she had good help, and it was still the hardest physical work of her life. And at certain points during that long October day, she understood in a way she never had before why Wes carried what he carried. Abigail stayed in the house all day. Eli, who was 9 now and understood more than he was given credit for and less than he thought, stayed in the yard with Cordero, who found him increasingly elaborate tasks to occupy him. Wes stayed by the stove and kept it going and was present, which was what he had promised, and she knew he was there even when she couldn't see him. The baby arrived at 20 minutes past 4 in the afternoon. A girl. Small and emphatically alive, with a voice she was using with complete conviction from the first moment, as though she had been planning this announcement for some time and intended to make it clearly. "Mrs." Prentice put her in Clara's arms and said, "There you are," in the tone of someone ticking something off a list, and Clara looked at the small face, eyes shut, furious, entirely herself, and felt something so large and so specific that she didn't try to name it because naming it would have made it smaller than it was. "Wes," she said. He was in the doorway. He had been standing there, she realized, for she didn't know how long she hadn't heard him come, and he was looking at the baby with an expression she had not seen before on him or on anyone, something that was past the fear now. On the other side of it, the thing you found when you went through instead of around. He came and sat beside her, and she held the baby toward him, and he took her, carefully, with the hands of someone handling the most important thing, not performing careful, actually careful. And he looked at his daughter's face. He didn't say anything for a long moment. "She's got your chin," he said finally. "She's got your lungs," Mrs. Prentice said from across the room, without looking up. Clara laughed. Actually laughed, tired and raw and genuine, and Wes looked at her with that open face, and outside the window the October afternoon was doing what October afternoons did, going gold and long and unhurried, and none of them were anywhere else. Eli named her, Or rather, Eli proposed a name with such immediate confidence that no one seriously considered overruling it. May, he said, the first time he was allowed in the room, standing at the foot of the bed with his hat in his hands and his eyes very large. That's what her name should be. Why May? Wes said. Because it's Clara's middle name, Eli said with the patience of someone explaining something obvious. And she's Clara's daughter. Clara looked at him across the room. This boy who had sat on the kitchen floor and told her about a horse named Compass and asked whether forgetting was the same as not loving. This boy who had said she's ours in a courtroom in Mill Haven with his feet not touching the floor. May, Clara said. May, Wes agreed. Abigail, standing near the window, said nothing, but the expression on her face was the undefended one, the young one. And she was looking at the baby in Clara's arms with something that Clara recognized because she had seen its shape before, in a different context. The expression of someone deciding, without quite being aware they were deciding, that something mattered to them. Dunmore came to the ranch in November, which was not strictly necessary, but which he explained, without much elaboration, as a matter of wanting to deliver certain documents in person. He had with him the final paperwork from the territorial court, the formal dismissal of all pending actions related to the Calder marriage and property title, signed by aldermen and stamped and entirely, completely, legally resolved. He sat at the kitchen table, his usual place by now, and drank his coffee and looked at the paperwork laid out in front of Wes and Clara, and he said, "That's the end of it," in a tone that suggested he did not say those words often and meant them when he did. "Thank you," Wes said, "for everything." Dunmore made a slight gesture that dismissed the thanks without being rude about it. "You did the work," he said. "Both of you. I gave you the framework." Clara was sitting with May in the crook of her arm. The baby was awake and engaged in the serious business of looking at the ceiling with profound concentration, and she looked at the papers and thought about everything that had gone into making them possible. The courtroom in Mill Haven, the 6 months of review. The morning Granger had ridden up the track alone and said, "I'm going to withdraw the petition," with the voice of a man who had arrived somewhere he hadn't expected to arrive. The night she had sat in the dark with her hand on her stomach and thought about all the versions of herself that had existed over the past year. "Can I ask you something?" she said to Dunmore. "Of course." "Alderman. He ruled to keep the review period back in April. I never entirely understood that. He could have dismissed it outright." Dunmore looked at his coffee for a moment. "He could have," he said carefully. "I've thought about it. My honest read is that Alderman is not a pure instrument of Granger's interests. He's a man who has accepted favors and has let that compromise him more than he should have. But he's not without judgment." A pause. "I think the children walking into that courtroom changed something, not enough to dismiss it outright. He still needed to give Granger something, but enough to not let it go the wrong way entirely." "Abigail changed it," Wes said. "Abigail and Eli both," Dunmore said. "Though Abigail's testimony was—" He seemed to search for the right word. "It was the most honest thing said in that room all day," which is a low bar, given what courtrooms typically contain, but she clears it considerably. Abigail was at the counter with her back to them, pretending not to have heard this and not quite managing it, which Clara could tell from the particular set of her shoulders. Behold. Dunmore left after lunch. Cordero was out on the south pasture. Eli was in the barn with Compass. The house was quiet in the specific way it went quiet in the middle of a November afternoon when the work of the morning was done and the work of the evening hadn't started yet. Wes sat at the kitchen table with the dismissed papers in front of him and looked at them for a long time. Clara sat across from him with May asleep in her arms, and she watched him look at the papers, and she thought about what it cost a person to fight for something for years. Not in the dramatic sense, not the way stories usually told it, with clear victories and obvious turning points, but in the daily sense. The cost of waking up every morning with something unresolved, the specific weight of a threat that never entirely went away, the way it shaped decisions and silences and the quality of a man's sleep. She had known it for less than a year, and it had been enough. He had carried it for 3. "What are you thinking?" she said. He looked up. "That it's quiet," he said. "In a way it hasn't been in a long time." "Good quiet or strange quiet?" He considered. "Both," he said. "Mostly good." She nodded. Wes, I want to say something. All right. When I got off that stagecoach in January, I thought I was done. She kept her voice even, because this was important and she wanted to say it precisely. Not dramatically done, just, I thought I had run out of the kind of luck that lets you build anything. I thought the Ashfords had been right, in a way, that there wasn't anything left in me worth the trouble of keeping. He looked at her steadily. He did not interrupt. What I know now, that I didn't know then, is that the thing that gets you through is not luck. It's not circumstances. It's the decision to stay in the room. She looked at him. You stayed in the room, Wes. This year, when it was hard, when you were afraid, you stayed. That's not a small thing. I don't want it to go unsaid. He was quiet for a moment. You stayed too, he said. You stayed in a room that wasn't yours yet and made it yours by the work of it. That's what I mean, she said. That's all any of it is. Deciding to stay and doing the work. May stirred in her arms. A small movement. A sound that was not quite a complaint and not quite contentment, but somewhere in between. The private language of someone too new to the world to have words for it yet. Clara looked at her daughter's face and felt the thing she still didn't have a name for, the thing she had stopped trying to name because it was larger than language. She's going to be difficult, Wes said. Good, Clara said. She cried for 40 minutes last night. She's establishing her position, Clara said. I respect it. Wes looked at the baby and then at Clara, and he had the expression on his face that she had come to understand was his version of happiness. Not performed, not announced, just present, quiet, the thing underneath all the other things when none of them were in the way. The thing about a life, the real texture of it, not the version people told afterward when the hard parts had been smoothed into lessons, was that it did not resolve cleanly. Clara knew this. She had known it before this year, and she knew it more specifically now. May cried in the night, and the nights were long. The ranch had a difficult week in November when 2 of the cattle got into trouble on the north pasture, and Wes and Cordero spent 3 days fixing it in near-freezing temperatures and came in at night too tired to talk. The kitchen accounts showed a quarter that had been harder than expected, and Clara recalculated twice and adjusted, and it came out all right, but only just. Abigail, who had seemed in September to have arrived at something settled, had a week in November where she was closed and difficult and short, with everyone including Eli. And when Clara finally found the right moment to ask about it, quietly, in the barn, Abigail said in a voice that was controlled and cost her something that she had been thinking about her mother's birthday, which had been the second week of November, and she hadn't said anything because she hadn't known how. You don't have to know how, Clara said. You just have to say it. I don't want to make it. Abigail stopped. Everyone's been so... Abigail. Clara waited until the girl looked at her. Missing your mother is not a problem to be managed around everyone else's feelings. It's a fact of your life. You don't have to schedule it. Abigail looked at her, the young face, the undefended one. She would have liked May, she said. Her voice was steady, but only by effort. Tell me about her, Clara said. Tell me what she was like. And Abigail did, standing in the barn in November with the horses breathing warm in their stalls. She talked about her mother for the first time in any real way. Not the performed grief of a child being correct about loss, but the actual specific person. The laugh that was too loud. Yes, the one Wes had described, and the way she made cornbread without measuring anything, and how she had been afraid of thunderstorms but refused to admit it, and how she used to braid Abigail's hair every Sunday morning and hum something under her breath that Abigail had never identified and now could not remember and was afraid she would forget entirely. You won't forget, Clara said. The things that mattered, you carry. Not perfectly, but you carry them. How do you know? Because I have things from people I've lost that I thought I'd forget, and I didn't. The specific things, the textures of a person, those stay longer than you think. Abigail was quiet for a moment. Do you miss your husband? She said. The first one. Yes, Clara said, in a specific way. Not the same way anymore as when I first came here, but he was a real person who mattered, and that doesn't disappear. Does that bother Papa? Your father is a man who understands that people have histories, Clara said. He has one too. We don't ask each other to erase things. That's not how it works between us. Abigail looked at her, a long, measuring look. Then she nodded once, the way Wes nodded when he had decided something, a signature that ran in the family. "Okay," she said, and then, "I'm going to write to my aunt in Missouri again. I want to tell her about May." "That's a good idea," Clara said. "Do you want to read it before I send it?" It was a small ask. It was not a small thing. "Yes," Clara said. "I'd like that." Judge Alderman came to the ranch on a Friday in late November, which no one had expected. He came with no advance notice, no lawyer, no official papers. He came in a plain coat on a plain horse, and he told Wes at the gate that he was making a private visit, that he had nothing official to deliver, and that he would not take up much of anyone's time. Wes looked at him for a long moment with the expression of a man deciding something. Then he opened the gate. Alderman sat at the kitchen table. Everyone sat at the kitchen table eventually, and he accepted coffee, and he looked at the house with the eyes of a man doing an honest assessment of what he was seeing. He looked at the stove, the accounts ledger open on the counter, the baby cradle near the window where May was sleeping in the thin November light. He looked at the accounts in Abigail's handwriting on the counter's edge, at the repaired chair by the wall that Clara had fixed herself with a piece of hickory and considerable stubbornness, at the general evidence of a household that was not performing itself for anyone, but was simply, consistently, in the process of being lived in. Wes sat across from him. Clara sat to the side with May. Abigail was in the doorway, technically leaving, but not quite. "I wanted to see it," Alderman said, without preamble. "The ranch. I've been in this business long enough that I think I can tell the difference between a household that exists and one that's been arranged to look like it does." "And?" Wes said. Alderman looked at Clara. "I owe you an honest assessment, Mrs. Calder. I allowed this to go further than it should have in April. I knew Granger's survey argument was thin. I should have dismissed it then, and I didn't, and I've had to sit with that." Clara looked at him steadily. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you stood in my courtroom and told the truth when it would have been easier not to. And because your children rode 32 miles and stood in my courtroom and told it too." He paused. "I have children of my own. I know what that costs a person." The kitchen was quiet. "The dismissal stands," he said. "Everything is settled. I'm not here to reopen anything. He looked at the cradle by the window, at May's sleeping face. "I wanted to see that it was real." "Is it?" Clara said. He looked at her. Something in his face that was not the judge's face, something older and more human underneath it. "Yes," he said. "It is." He finished his coffee and stood and said his goodbyes, and he shook Wes's hand and nodded to Clara and looked at Abigail in the doorway with an expression that Clara thought might have been apology, though he did not say so, and he rode away down the track and did not look back. Abigail watched him go from the doorway. "He felt bad," she said. "Yes," Clara said. "Good," she said. The same word she had used about Granger in September. The same uncomplicated clarity. There was something Clara had been thinking about since the summer, in the quiet parts of the day when her hands were occupied and her mind was free to move. Not a grand thought. She was not a person who trusted grand thoughts, which tended to make reality look smaller by comparison. Just a thing she had been turning over, the way you turned over a tool to understand its real shape. The Ashford family had told her, in the composed and surgical language of people who believed they were being factual, that she had no claim to anything, that she had produced nothing of value, that she was, in the accounting of the people who were doing the accounting, essentially a deficit. She had believed them, a little, in the way that you believed people who said things with sufficient certainty for sufficient time, not completely, not in the part of herself she trusted most, but enough. Enough to board a stagecoach going west with 43 cents because west was the only direction that had no memory attached to it yet. What she understood now, in November, in a kitchen that was hers and a ranch that was hers, and a family that was hers in the deep, unqualified sense, the sense that had nothing to do with law or paperwork or anyone else's determination of her worth, was that the Ashfords had been measuring the wrong thing. They had been measuring legacy the way certain people measured it. By name, by inheritance, by the continuation of an existing structure, by what you added to what was already there. What she had done was something else. She had built. not from nothing. No one built from nothing. You always built from something. And what she had built from was work and honesty and the decision made every day to stay in the room, to do the next thing, to be fair and precise and present, and to tell the truth even when the truth was uncomfortable. That was not a dramatic legacy. It did not make good inscription material. But May would grow up on land that was protected because someone had fought for it clearly and without stopping. Eli would carry into whatever his adult life became the understanding that a family could be built from unlikely materials if the people doing the building were willing. Abigail, who was already, at 13, more capable than most adults Clara had known, and who would spend her life figuring out how to hold her mother's memory and her own future in the same two hands, Abigail would remember that the honest thing was the useful thing, even when it cost something. Those were not inscriptions. They were lives. And Clara, the woman who had arrived with 43 cents in a split bag and the specific poverty of someone who had been told repeatedly that she was not enough, Clara had something she had not had a year ago and could not have predicted and would not trade for any safer version of the past 12 months. She had chosen and been chosen and stayed and built, and that was the whole of it. That was, she had come to understand, enough, more than enough. It was everything. Miwashim. The first real snow of the season came in the last week of November, arriving overnight with the quiet efficiency of something that had been planning this for a while and saw no need to announce itself. Clara woke to the white light of a snowed-in morning and lay still for a moment, listening to the ranch in its winter version, the animals, the wind, the old timber, and to the small sounds of the household waking, Eli's feet hitting the floor overhead with the characteristic lack of subtlety, Abigail's steadier movement down the hall, the stove in the kitchen beginning to come alive because Abigail had gotten there first. Wes was already awake beside her. He was looking at the ceiling with the particular stillness of a man who was not thinking about anything specific but simply present in the morning. May was in her cradle by the window, awake and conducting her usual silent assessment of the ceiling, which she found endlessly interesting. "Another winter," Wes said. "Another winter," Clara said. "You ready?" She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything. The accounts were in order. The larder was full. She had made very sure of that. The roof had been checked and was sound. The cattle were where they needed to be. The family was what it was, imperfect and present and real, and she had her hands in it completely, and her name on it legally, and her whole self committed to it in the way that could not be formalized by any court. "Yes," she said. "Are you?" He turned his head and looked at her with the open face, the real one. "Yeah," he said. "I am." Outside, the snow kept coming down, steady and unhurried, covering the pasture and the fencing and the creek in the northeast corner that had always been theirs, settling over the Calder Ranch in the particular silence of a winter morning that did not ask anything of anyone yet, that simply was. And inside the house, in the kitchen, Abigail was burning the edges off one side of the cornbread and telling Eli it was fine, and Eli was arguing that it wasn't fine, and it was a completely ordinary disagreement in a completely ordinary morning in a life that had been built out of the most unlikely materials and had become, against every reasonable expectation, exactly what it was supposed to be. Not perfect, not finished, just real, and theirs, and built to last.